My best friend Sarah died after a horrific battle with cancer and left me $50,000 in her will. But when I saw her drinking coffee at Starbucks 6 months later, I discovered the shocking truth. She had never actually died and had made me part of a massive insurance fraud scheme. Alex Thompson had always considered Sarah Martinez to be more than just his best friend. She was like the sister he never had. They had met during their freshman year at Arizona State University and had been inseparable ever since, sharing everything from study sessions and road trips to career advice and relationship drama. Sarah was the type of person who remembered everyone's birthday, always knew the right thing to say during difficult times, and had an infectious laugh that could brighten anyone's worst day. After college, both Alex and Sarah had settled in Phoenix, working entry-level jobs while trying to figure out their adult lives. Alex worked as a junior accountant at a small firm, while Sarah had landed a position as a medical assistant at a busy clinic downtown. They still spent most weekends together, whether hiking in the desert, trying new restaurants, or just watching movies at Alex's apartment while complaining about their student loans and demanding bosses. Their friendship was the kind that made other people slightly jealous, completely platonic, but with a depth of trust and loyalty that many married couples would envy. Sarah knew Alex's social security number because she had helped him apply for jobs, and Alex had keys to Sarah's apartment because he watered her plants whenever she traveled. They had even joked about being each other's emergency contacts and backup plans for everything from medical emergencies to airport pickups. What Alex didn't realize was that Sarah's role as his emergency contact would become crucial in ways he never could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came during what should have been a routine dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant in downtown Phoenix. Sarah had seemed distracted and kept checking her phone throughout the meal, which was completely unlike her usual behavior. When Alex asked if everything was okay, Sarah deflected with jokes and changed the subject to his dating life, but he could see something was bothering her. Over the following weeks, Sarah began canceling plans more frequently and seemed increasingly anxious about things she wouldn't discuss. She mentioned having some medical tests done, but brushed off Alex's concerns, insisting it was just routine preventive care. Sarah had always been private about certain aspects of her life, but this level of secrecy was new and troubling to Alex, who had grown accustomed to knowing everything about his best friend's daily routine. The devastating news came on a Tuesday morning in March, when Sarah's cousin Elena called Alex to inform him that Sarah had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. According to Elena, Sarah had been experiencing symptoms for months, but had hidden her condition from everyone except her immediate family. The doctors were saying she had maybe 6 months to live, and Sarah had specifically requested that Alex not be told because she didn't want him to worry or treat her differently. But here's where Sarah's secretive behavior would take on a much darker meaning than anyone suspected. Alex was heartbroken by the news, but respected Sarah's wishes about not discussing her illness directly with her. Instead, he tried to be supportive in subtle ways, bringing her favorite coffee when they met, suggesting less physically demanding activities, and making sure she knew he was available whenever she needed anything. Sarah seemed grateful for his sensitivity, though she continued to maintain that everything was under control and that she was receiving excellent care. The progression of Sarah's supposed illness was rapid and devastating to witness. Within 2 months, she had lost significant weight, was frequently exhausted, and had started wearing wigs after what Elena explained was aggressive chemotherapy treatment. Alex watched his vibrant, energetic best friend fade away before his eyes, and the helplessness he felt was overwhelming. What Alex didn't know was that every detail of Sarah's illness was being carefully orchestrated for reasons that had nothing to do with cancer. Sarah's final weeks were particularly difficult as she became increasingly isolated and weak. Elena served as the primary communication link between Sarah and her friends, explaining that Sarah was too sick for visitors, but appreciated cards and messages. Alex wrote her several long letters expressing his gratitude for their friendship and his hopes that she would somehow recover, though Elena's updates made it clear that Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The phone call came on a Sunday evening in late August, just as Alex was preparing for another week of work. Elena's voice was shaking as she informed him that Sarah had passed away peacefully in her sleep after a final hospitalization. The funeral would be small and private, limited to immediate family members only, but Elena assured Alex that Sarah had left specific instructions about wanting him to have something important. What Sarah had supposedly left for Alex would become the key to exposing one of the most elaborate deception schemes he could ever imagine. The reading of Sarah's will took place in Elena's living room rather than a lawyer's office, which Alex found slightly unusual but attributed to the family's desire for privacy during their grief. Elena explained that Sarah had written a simple will leaving most of her belongings to family members, but she had specifically requested that Alex receive her life insurance payout of $50,000 as a gesture of gratitude for years of friendship and support. But this generous gift would soon become the center of a mystery that would consume Alex's life for months. Alex was overwhelmed by Sarah's final gesture of generosity, especially since he knew she hadn't been wealthy and had struggled with medical bills during her illness. The life insurance check arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, accompanied by a note supposedly written by Sarah before her death, expressing her hope that the money would help Alex pay off his student loans and maybe take the European vacation they had always talked about planning together. Here's where Alex's grateful acceptance of Sarah's gift would lead him into a web of deception that threatened to destroy his life. Alex decided to honor Sarah's memory by using the money responsibly, paying down his student debt, setting aside some for emergency savings, and planning the trip to Europe that Sarah had always wanted them to take together. He kept a small amount accessible for day-to-day expenses and treated himself to a few items that Sarah would have approved of, including a high-quality camera for documenting his eventual travels. But 6 months after Sarah's funeral, Alex's world was shattered by an impossible sighting that would change everything he believed about his best friend's death. Alex was grabbing his usual afternoon coffee at the Starbucks near his office when he saw a familiar figure standing in line ahead of him. The woman had shorter hair and was dressed differently than he remembered, but there was no mistaking Sarah's distinctive laugh when she joked with the barista about her complicated order. Alex felt his hands shaking as he watched her pay for her drink and walk toward the exit, moving with the same confident stride that had been absent during her supposed final months of illness. The moment Alex called out Sarah's name and saw her freeze in recognition would mark the beginning of the most terrifying revelation of his life. Sarah's face went completely white when she turned and saw Alex staring at her in disbelief. For several seconds, neither of them spoke, as Sarah clearly struggled to process how to handle this impossible encounter. Alex approached her slowly, his mind racing with questions about how his supposedly dead best friend could be standing in front of him, looking healthier than she had in the months before her death. But what Sarah said next would expose the true scope of the criminal conspiracy Alex had unknowingly become part of. Sarah's first words were not an explanation or apology, but a panicked demand to know what Alex was doing in this particular Starbucks location. She seemed more concerned about being discovered than about explaining her miraculous resurrection from pancreatic cancer. When Alex stammered questions about how she could be alive and why she had let everyone believe she was dead, Sarah looked around nervously and insisted they couldn't discuss it in public. Here's where Alex learned that his best friend's death was connected to something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Sarah reluctantly agreed to meet Alex later that evening at a parking garage downtown, warning him that he was now in serious danger simply by knowing she was alive. But what Sarah would reveal during that meeting about why she had been forced to disappear would be more shocking than Alex was prepared to hear. What Sarah told Alex about the real reason behind her fake death would explain why $50,000 had been more than just a generous gift. But what Sarah revealed about who she had really been working for would destroy everything Alex thought he knew about their friendship. And the truth about why Alex specifically had been chosen to receive that money would prove that their entire relationship had been built on deception. What Alex would learn about how long Sarah had been lying to him would be more devastating than discovering she was alive. But the most shocking revelation about Alex's role in Sarah's scheme was yet to come. Sarah's explanation of the real source of the $50,000 revealed a level of deception that went far beyond faking her own death. The money hadn't come from any insurance policy, and Sarah's supposed medical bills and treatments had never existed. But what Alex learned about who had actually funded his inheritance would expose the true scope of the criminal conspiracy he had unknowingly become part of. What Sarah admitted about how Alex had been selected for this role would shatter his ability to trust anyone ever again. And the revelation about how long Alex had been under surveillance would prove that every moment of their friendship had been carefully calculated. But here's where Alex discovered that his manipulation had been far more extensive and dangerous than just receiving fraudulent money. What Sarah was forced to confess about the people she had really been working for would explain why Alex was now in mortal danger. And the truth about what those people wanted from Alex would force him to make an impossible choice. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. What Sarah finally admitted about Alex's role in the larger conspiracy would prove that he had never been just an innocent bystander. Sarah insisted that Alex would have to disappear with her and enter the witness protection program, abandoning his job, his family, and his entire identity to avoid being killed by the people Sarah had been investigating. The FBI could arrange for Alex to receive a new name and relocation to another state, but he would have to leave Phoenix immediately and never contact anyone from his previous life again. That's when Alex made the decision that would determine whether he survived the criminal conspiracy his best friend had drawn him into. Alex refused to abandon his life and demanded that Sarah and the FBI find another solution that didn't require him to disappear. He argued that he had been manipulated without his consent and shouldn't be forced to pay the price for other people's criminal activities. Sarah warned him that staying in Phoenix would likely result in his death, but Alex insisted on taking his chances rather than living as a fugitive from his own life. But Alex's refusal to cooperate would lead to consequences that neither he nor Sarah had anticipated. Alex's decision to stay in Phoenix and fight rather than flee would ultimately expose the entire criminal network and bring justice to dozens of victims who had been defrauded. Rather than accepting witness protection, Alex contacted a lawyer and demanded that the FBI provide him with protection while he helped expose the crimes he had unknowingly been made part of. His cooperation proved crucial in gathering the final evidence needed to arrest the clinic's administrators and their criminal associates. The federal investigation that followed Alex's testimony led to the conviction of 12 individuals on charges including healthcare fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Sarah's undercover work, combined with Alex's willingness to testify about how he had been manipulated, provided prosecutors with the comprehensive evidence they needed to dismantle the entire operation. The criminal organization had defrauded insurance companies of over $8 million using fake patient identities and treatments that never occurred. Dozens of real patients had also been harmed by receiving substandard care while their identities were used for fraudulent billing. But the most satisfying part of the justice process was Alex's recovery of compensation for the psychological damage and financial exploitation he had suffered. Alex sued both the FBI and the healthcare fraud conspirators for involving him in their scheme without his knowledge or consent. His lawsuit argued that using him as an unwitting accomplice in maintaining Sarah's fake death had violated his rights and put his life in danger. The settlement he received was substantial enough to pay off all his debts and provide financial security he had never expected to achieve. Sarah's fate in the aftermath of the criminal trials would prove that her choices had consequences she hadn't anticipated. Despite her cooperation with federal authorities, Sarah faced serious legal consequences for her role in defrauding Alex and endangering his life through deception. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and received a suspended sentence contingent on her continued cooperation with law enforcement and completion of community service. The fake death scheme she had participated in was deemed unnecessary by federal prosecutors, who argued that other protective measures could have been used. What happened between Alex and Sarah after the trials would demonstrate that some betrayals cannot be forgiven, even when they were committed for supposedly noble reasons. Alex made the decision to cut all contact with Sarah permanently, despite her attempts to apologize and rebuild their friendship. He argued that their entire relationship had been compromised by her willingness to manipulate him for her undercover work, and that he could never trust her motives again. Sarah's letters and messages went unanswered as Alex focused on rebuilding his life with people who valued honesty over convenience. The criminal organization's attempts to intimidate Alex during the trial process ultimately led to additional charges and longer prison sentences for their members. Several associates of the healthcare fraud ring had made threats against Alex before and during the trials, not realizing that he was under federal protection and that all communications were being monitored. These intimidation attempts provided prosecutors with additional evidence of the organization's willingness to use violence, resulting in enhanced sentences under federal racketeering statutes. But the most meaningful outcome of Alex's ordeal was his decision to use his experience to help other victims of fraud schemes. 3 years after discovering that his dead best friend was alive and had been using him in a federal investigation, Alex has built a new career helping fraud victims navigate the complex legal and financial challenges they face. He works as a consultant for law firms specializing in white-collar crime, using his personal experience with manipulation and deception to help other victims understand their rights and options for recovery. Alex's expertise in financial fraud has made him valuable to both prosecutors and defense attorneys who need someone who understands the psychological impact of being unknowingly involved in criminal schemes. He frequently testifies as an expert witness in cases involving insurance fraud, identity theft, and federal investigations that compromise innocent civilians. His work has helped dozens of people receive compensation for damages they suffered as unwitting participants in others' crimes. The settlement money Alex received from his lawsuit allowed him to pursue the European vacation he and Sarah had always planned, though he ultimately decided to use the trip for volunteer work rather than tourism. He spent 6 months working with fraud prevention organizations in several countries, learning about international approaches to protecting civilians from being manipulated by criminal investigations. Alex's relationship with trust and friendship has been permanently changed by his experience with Sarah, but he has gradually learned to build new relationships based on transparency and honesty. He maintains that his betrayal by Sarah was more traumatic than the criminal threats he faced, and he now requires complete honesty from anyone who wants to be close to him. His current relationships are fewer but more genuine than the friendships he had before, learning how easily he could be deceived. Sarah completed her community service and witness protection obligations, but her attempts to rebuild her life have been complicated by the legal and personal consequences of her choices. She moved to a different state and works under her real name in a field unrelated to healthcare, but her conviction for fraud conspiracy appears in background checks and has limited her career options. Her efforts to contact Alex or mutual friends have been unsuccessful, as most people feel her deception was unforgivable, regardless of her cooperation with law enforcement. The healthcare clinic where the fraud originated was permanently closed, and its building now houses a legitimate medical practice that employs several of the honest staff members who had been unaware of the criminal activities. The new practice has implemented strict oversight procedures and transparency requirements designed to prevent the kind of billing fraud that had operated undetected for years under the previous management. Alex often reflects on how a simple life insurance inheritance led to the exposure of a massive criminal enterprise and his own unwitting participation in federal law enforcement activities. He emphasizes in his professional work that victims of fraud schemes are not responsible for the crimes committed against them, even when they unknowingly benefit from or participate in criminal activities. The $50,000 that had initially seemed like a generous gift from a dying friend became the key to exposing crimes that had victimized hundreds of patients and defrauded millions of dollars from insurance companies. Alex's story has become a case study in law enforcement training programs about the importance of protecting civilian informants and ensuring that undercover operations don't create additional victims. Alex continues to advocate for stronger protections for people who are unknowingly involved in criminal investigations, arguing that law enforcement agencies should be required to obtain consent before using civilians as unwitting participants in their operations. His lobbying efforts have contributed to policy discussions about reforming how federal agencies conduct undercover work and protect the rights of people who become inadvertently involved in criminal cases. In the end, the fake death that destroyed Alex's faith and friendship became the foundation for his life's work, protecting other people from similar betrayals. Sometimes the most devastating personal betrayals lead to the most meaningful professional purposes. And Alex has learned that building genuine relationships requires the kind of radical honesty that many people find uncomfortable, but that creates unshakable trust. The woman he thought was his dying best friend turned out to be a federal informant who saw him as a useful tool. But the experience taught Alex that real friendship requires vulnerability and truth rather than convenience and manipulation. He now helps other fraud victims understand that their value as human beings isn't determined by how others choose to exploit their trust and generosity. Sometimes the people closest to us are hiding the biggest lies. My best friend's fake death taught me that real friendship can't survive without truth, but it also showed me that surviving betrayal can become the foundation for helping others heal from similar wounds. What would you do if you discovered your best friend had faked their death and used you in a criminal investigation? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe for daily shocking friendship betrayal stories like this one. Smash that like button if this incredible story amazed you. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Comment your thoughts and share your own friendship betrayal experiences. We upload a brand new jaw-dropping real-life story every single day. Don't miss tomorrow's shocking tale that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next incredible story.